Today's lecture is about the hidden forces of Ahriman. This originally was done by Samael Aun Weor, in which he talks about Ahriman, and as well he mentions Steiner and many other lectures about Ahriman. So who is Ahriman? He comes from the Zoroastrian tradition, and he is the antithesis of Christ, or in Zoroastrian, Christ or God or the heavens is Spenta Mainyu, or Ora Mazda. So he's just the antithesis of that energy. There's a quote that says, Ahriman is evil by choice. It is not, he says, that I cannot create anything, but that I will not. So the purpose of Ahriman is to extinguish anything of the soul, spirit, or even life. And he does this through modern sciences, through teaching mathematics, physics, chemistry, biology, astrology, and the mechanics. And for people to take that as absolute truth, to teach its illusions without knowing they're illusions. Really what they are is half-truths. For instance, what is the thing that stares in the night sky of all of humanity? It's the cosmic space. And how does humanity decipher it? Well, they see it through the mechanics of mathematics, physics, and numbers. And that's how they explain the universe. This isn't a total illusion. It's really just a half-truth, not the absolute truth. And they forget about that there's an intelligence behind that organization, as well as a consciousness. Another goal of Ahriman or that Ahrimanic force, is for people to believe that the welfare that they depends on economics and their material needs. So they will see something spiritual, they'll see something of meditation, and then they'll realize, what good does this give me? How can I have a better economic situation? And therefore they go to universities and schools, and they start to solidify more of that materialism within. With our current thinking nowadays, with the current intellect, we're only really hitting the surface level of realities, and we're not reaching down into the depths of reality. So therefore, you can prove one side and as well prove its exact opposite. I saw this happen once. I was watching two people that were very smart. One was arguing spirituality and gave good proofs, and the other one was arguing materialism and gave good proofs. From an unbiased point of view, it looked like they both had good reasoning and good intellect. But the problem is, at least from the standpoint of the materialist, they were really just arguing from the intellectual point of view, and without deeping or reaching into the depths of reality. Knowing this, that we can prove one side or the other, the exact opposite, we can start to examine the proofs of modern science. So the knowledge that humanity wants now with the truths can't be obtained with their type of knowledge. So therefore, they just look towards numbers, principles of measurements and volumes. And unfortunately, they can be easily deceived, and usually they're used for deception. If I were to take this picture and ask you, how many lines are there? Well, you would say 3 lines. But another person could exactly say, well, there's 2 lines in one rectangle. Because a long rectangle could be a line as well. So someone that didn't observe this, but took the word from someone they know, that there's 3 lines, they would easily argue with the person that did observe it, that said there's 2 lines in one rectangle. If they're attached to that idea, they'd be vehemently against the other person. But the problem is they never actually went into the qualitative aspect of this. They never actually tried to observe it themselves. Therefore, their whole thing is just an illusion. The only person that really has a type of proof of it is someone that's actually observed it. And this is another goal of Ahriman, to take just the materialistic aspect and disregard anything of qualitativeness. The physicality, since people just believe that their human body is all they have, which is another trickery of materialism. They believe that their race, their gender, their thoughts are the reality, and there's nothing else. Issues that we've had in the last few years, especially in the presidential election, we've seen it through the riots. We saw it with the virus as well as the vaccine. We're seeing this qualitativeness always being manipulated. So people do not grasp the realities, for reality can be grasped only when the necessity for spiritual knowledge and deep penetration into the nature of things is thoroughly understood. That's Rudolf Steiner. So we see this great division in humanity because modern science is becoming the new religion, the new dogma, but it's spirituality that has to become the new science. And there's a way out of that, but it starts by working on ourselves. And right now, we just have a sleepy consciousness or just an ordinary consciousness. We have moods, thoughts, ideas, and impulses. We have to start thinking psychologically to become more independent or individualistic in our thinking. To think psychologically, someone is looking for a spiritual foundation in their existence. So before we, talk about that, we should understand what our state of being is. And to think about this, because to understand where we're at now can give us a path to understand how to get to a greater state of consciousness. But first we have to recognize where we are. So the state of being can be symbolized through the cross. And here you get the rosy cross. The horizontal line represents just life, just the mechanics of life, just from birth to death. There's nothing we can really do about that. That's just physical life. But then also we have the vertical line. This is the line of being. Obviously, the line is higher. We are at a superior level of consciousness. If we are attached to the fears and unknowns of life, then we are at an inferior level of consciousness. To think psychologically and to work on oneself is the vertical path. Most people identify with life as a line of events, and therefore they chase experiences because that's how they identify with life. But they forget that life is a psychological gymnasium that can reach these superior levels of consciousness. If we take life, or physical life, just as a goal in itself, then we've totally forgotten that we even need to work on ourselves. But if we do recognize that we do have to work on ourselves, we can perform a radical change within. So each one of us has a spark of a consciousness, you could say in essence, that has the ability to reach that superior levels. But right now we are innocent in the sense that we do not understand how that works. So therefore we automatically identify our desires and things that invents. Right now, so we are at an inferior level of consciousness. Vertical is different. It is a path of the intelligent rebels, of revolutionaries. When one remembers oneself and works upon oneself, when one does not become identified with all the problems and sorrows of life, it is a fact that one is traveling along the vertical path. So before we get started, we should understand what psychology means. So psychology, unfortunately nowadays, we think of materialism. People really don't understand what the true meaning of that word really is. If you break it up, you'll see there's two words. And this isn't something that's just right from Gnosis. You can go to Wikipedia and you can see this. Two words, psyche, logos. Psyche is the soul. It's the mind. Or what consumes of the mind, which is the mind, heart, and will. The logos, principle of governing the cosmos, the word, God. Logos is the Greek word. The direct translation to English is his word. If you read in the Bible in John, the first sentence, he says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." This is the first logos, the second logos, and the third logos. We see three words, which refers to the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, as we see at the top. When we look at this diagram on the left, it is the tree of life. It's a roadmap of the consciousness as well as the soul. Bottom there, you see the shadow of the tree of life, which is Qlipoth, which is empty shells or hell, meaning there's no consciousness left, and it's a recycling of nature. In between there, you see Malkuth, which is considered the valley of tears, which we are a part of. It's because we are in between the superior levels and inferior levels of consciousness, the heavens and hells. This tree of life is not only a map of ourselves within, but is also a map of the universe as well. Malkuth represents the physicality and ourselves. So someone that is truly thinking psychologically is someone that has the knowledge of the relationship of the soul with God. So true psychology is the knowledge of the relationship with the soul with God. Esoteric psychology is the highest and most potent level of that knowledge, which is private and interior, and is entertained into in levels according to the internal initiatic process of the seekers. So if you look at the, this is the Greek letter psi, which is a symbol for psychology. If it's placed over the body, you see that the eye is connected with the physicality, but as well with the Father. And the two arms coming out, and the hands reaching up to the Son and the Holy Spirit, representing is connected to the Trinity. As well, Poseidon, which is a representation of the Father as well, is showing the sign of this eye. Two different states of consciousness. We have the external, but as well we have internal. So states are considered internal states. And externally, we have events, external events. To combine an internal state along with an external state is the way of acting intelligently. So for instance, well, if we have an external event, to use that intelligently is to have a corresponding correct, upright internal state. So for instance, I remember I was at Starbucks, and actually had to put this lecture together. And the line was quite long, and there was one cash register, and the guy in front of me was chatting the cash register up and just taking forever to make the order. When you want a simple tea, it's easy to get quite impatient pretty quick. So I wanted to say, about to say something, I stepped back because I could see it boiling in me, and I started just taking notice of what was happening around me. And I saw everyone in that Starbucks that was working there was working a lot. They were rushed. And I was like, what am I doing? So I backed off and realized my internal state is not corresponding with the reality. So I combined them both, and I said, all right, and then I just calmed down. So I observed the situation. If I were to do the exact opposite and not be aware of my impatience and then try to change the external world according to what I believe is correct, according to my illusion, this is an aromatic force. I've totally ignored everything that's within and believe the external is the reality. Someone that does not make that connection is foolish. It says, when one wants to separate the external events from the internal states of the consciousness, one demonstrates concretely his incapacity of existing in defined manner. Those who learn how to consciously combine external events with the internal states march on the path of success. So in life, we'll have many challenges that are going to challenge us greatly. But to walk upright in life, we need to have a corresponding internal state according to those events. That's the only true way to change. There's this idea in materialism that since we have a physical body, we can produce consciousness. And you see this happening. They're trying to do it through computers. They're trying to do whatever they can. They think through drugs. And really, they're just trying to change external events. It's like if someone had a mirror in front of them, and because they saw the reflection in the mirror, they believe the mirror created them. Steiner gives a great explanation of this. He says, what then is intelligence? What is the content of our human intelligence? Imagine yourself standing in front of a mirror and looking into it. The picture presented to you by the mirror is you, but it has no reality at all. It is nothing but a reflection. All the intelligence within your soul, all the intellectual content, is only a mirror image. It has no reality. Just as your reflected image is called into existence through the mirror, so what mirrors itself as intelligence? It is called into existence through the physical apparatus of your body, through the brain. And as little as you can touch yourself by stretching your hand towards your reflected image, as in the mirror, as little you can lay hold of the spirit if you turn only to the intellectual, for the spirit is not there. And this is what is so enticing through the intellect, because it's the first apparatus we use. And since we are just seeing a reflection of what's happening in, we believe that's the reality, so we identify with it. But the point is, we haven't had any real, true spiritual experience with that. And we really need the courage to do that in order to enter the spiritual worlds. And we do that through conscious self-observation and voluntary suffering. Through self-observation, we start to see that we aren't really a true individual. We have impulses, different moods, different ideas and thoughts continuously floating around. And they all contradict each other. There's a total disorganization. We're not a true psychological human being in the sense of the word. So really, we are a multiplicity within. As you could say, we are a doctrine of many eyes. So the humanoid, in regards to his internal state, is a psychological multiplicity, a sum of eyes. If we had true individuality, if we were a unity instead of a multiplicity, then we would also have continuity or purpose, awakened consciousness, a particular individual will. That comes from Samael Aun Weor in the Treatise of Revolutionary Psychology. So within, if we've ever watched a movie and then afterwards we think of how funny it was or how violent it was, and we think of all the different characters, even when we go to sleep, we may see that in our mind, especially if we meditate. That energy that is used by the mind is getting bottled up within those characters. Someone that continuously does this, through greed or lust or whatever it may be, or anger, starts to embody that type of characteristic. And they create something, an entity called an ego, or eyes. Ego is really a Greek word. In Latin, translation of it is eyes. From the Glorian glossary, it says from the Latin for eye, and similar to the Greek ego. In Gnosis, the term ego is very different from the Freudian definition. In practical spirituality, the term ego refers to the psychological constructs in the mind that trap the consciousness. The ego is a multiplicity of contradictory psychological elements that we have inside and are in the sum of the ego. Each one is also called an ego or an I. Every ego is a psychological defect which produces suffering. So these egos start to gain energy and gain control over our mind. Someone who's a pessimist obviously thinks of negative actions all the time. That's something they have built. But this can be remedied through observing ourselves, through self-observation, and to observe. And that energy will gradually start to be taken away from that ego. It's becoming a more individual in our thinking, our feeling, and our will. But this starts with having attention, especially internally. It says the concrete and defined fact that the internal work begins with attention, which is concentrated in the full observation of oneself. Again, that's Samael Aun Weor. So in the tale of Zahak, which talks about Ahriman's goals, Zahak is a son of a king. And because of that wealth, he became weak-minded and ill-willed. At one point in his life, he met a good friend, disguised, which was Ahriman, disguised as his friend. That friend began to whisper in his ear, saying to kill your father. Eventually, Zahak listened and did kill his father. And as soon as that happened, Ahriman, his friend, disappeared. This is a symbolic story saying that he is killed his father. Well, if we look back on here, that connection with the father that has reached up here has been disconnected. He's killed it in his own psychology. That knowledge of the relationship with the soul with God is no more. His friend disappeared because that desire was satisfied. As you continue down the story, after this happened, Zahak became king. He believed himself to at least be king internally of himself. And he hired a cook. This cook, again, was Ahriman, disguised as a cook. And he produced great food for Zahak, and Zahak just wanted to pay him. And he asked, what can I do to pay you? And Ahriman, the cook, just said, I will just want to kiss you on the shoulder. And as soon as he did that, 2 snakes bursted out of his shoulder, as you see here. The cook is showing that that energy that is being cooked within is being transformed in a negative way. And therefore, it became an entity, a psychological I or an ego. This is the same myth as in Medusa in Greek mythology. As soon as this happened, those desires were resolved. Again, Ahriman the cook disappeared. And then Zahak was terrified. He's got these snakes growing out of his shoulders, so he decides to cut them, and they automatically grow back. So he gets a physician. And again, this is Ahriman disguised as a physician. And so what does he prescribe? He does not give him a solution, but he tells him to deal with it. And to deal with it, he says, you need to feed the brains of others to these snakes. Otherwise, these snakes will eat your brains. Now, obviously, this is symbolic again, because Ahriman had played a trick on him, saying that he must feed his own desires and for them to be tamed, but that if he does not satisfy his desires, he will suffer, and if he will be in misery. But this is a trick. The way is to walk through with consciously working on oneself through voluntary suffering. That's the way to the Father. Zahak did not end up well in the end. The story was not a good story. It was actually a terrible story. But it just showed the goals of Ahriman, that he is really the source of the ego, and really he is something beyond the ego. So in order to remedy this afflictions, there's 2 aspects. It's to observe and to self-observe. To observe is something that is done externally. For instance, if you come up to a traffic light, you see it's red, you stop. Fundamentally, nothing has changed within. But to self-observe, if you were impatient, or say you're in a rush, and you thought about actually going through the light, and then you decided to stop because you didn't want to be killed, well, in that case, we would want to self-observe ourselves. Go, what was the source of that rush? Why did I want to rush? Because I could have placed myself in harm. That's a proper action of intimately changing oneself for the better. So you see, to observe really doesn't change anything, but to self-observe internally fundamentally does. It says, in self-observation, the senses of external perception are worthless because attention is directed inward. The point of departure of official science in its practical side is observable. The point of departure for the work on oneself is self-observation, the self-observable. The type of knowledge that transforms someone internally can never be achieved through external observation. Observation is a way to modify the mechanical conditions of the world. Yet internal self-observation is a way to intimately change. So we have knowledge that we're sitting here listening to the lecture, which is something that is passive within us. We just have to know we sat down and listened. That's passive. But to actively know or comprehend or observe that we're sitting in there, it takes active attention. continuous energy to really observe where we are. It says observation of oneself, which is 100% active, is a way to change oneself. However, knowing, which is passive, is not a way to change oneself. Indeed, knowing is not an act of attention. Yet attention directed into oneself towards what is happening in our interior state is something positive. So we see these in our own state or in the world. We see there's an internal and external aspect to knowledge. Ahriman wants to convince us, that materialism wants to convince us that we live 100% in an external. But really, if we took observation of what's happening, people have goals in life that they want to achieve. Money-wise, spiritually wise. They have desires of what they want, moods, impulses. And that determines their whole exterior life. So you can claim that we live more in the interior than we do in the external. We may live in an illusion of the interior, but we do live in the interior. Both if you read the lectures of Steiner, but as well of Samael of Ariman, they talk about this materialistic force that is the antichrist, the antithesis. Ahriman is really, let me just back up a little bit. If we look at these two names here, we see Spenta, Mainyu, as well Angra, Mainyu. Word that's common to both these words is Mainyu. In the story, they're actually twin brothers. But it's really saying these energies, the two energies and how they're being used. Spenta means holy. Mainyu means mind and spirit. Angra, which is destructive, chaotic, disorderly, and inhibitive. Mainyu means mind and spirit. So you're seeing there's this energy that is happening. It is all about how it is transformed within. The reason the world is so chaotic is because everybody within is chaotic. Therefore, it's just our internal state is just a reflection of the external events. Angra Mainyu, which is short for Ahriman, Ahriman is short for that word, is really the antichrist. Samael Aun Weor describes Ahriman as something beyond the ego. He is the beginner and as well a type of residue. Properly, Ahriman is still beyond the ego itself. In our last meeting, he said that Ahriman is the ego. Yet now, advancing didactically, we must say that Ahriman is the basis of the ego, the foundation, that is beyond the myself. Ahriman is the inquisitus of which Paul of Tarsus speaks to us in the Holy Scriptures, the man of sin, the antithesis. We might say on the other side of the coin, in relation precisely to the Son of Man, it is the Antichrist. So Ahriman is kind of this, he is the beginner of the ego, as we saw in the tale of Zahak. But as well, he is type of residue. When the saints tried to eliminate the bad aspects within, especially the story of Jesus, he was able to eliminate the ego, but the Antichrist was always there trying to tempt him. Until an initiate actually eliminates that residue or the shadow of the ego, it has the ability to come back. For instance, if we have worked on ourselves and we noticed we reduced an aspect of ourselves quite a bit, suddenly it can come back. It's even talked about this in the Bible, in the Revelations. It says, "And behold, another beast coming up from the earth, and he had 2 horns, like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon. And he exerciseth the powers of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed and lived." So you see, the deadly wound was healed and lived. So even though we may have injured the ego, it still has the ability to heal itself and come back. He that lead the captivity shall go into captivity. He that kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. He's the patient. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. That's Paul of Tarsus. Next one, he says, circumcision is nothing, and uncircumcision is nothing. but the keeping of the commandments of God. Therefore, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creation. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things are become new. So the circumcision and uncircumcision comes from many different religions where they circumcise people. But really, this is just it's a clue that he's talking about here. But he says it does not matter what you do physically if you read the previous lines, Paul of Taurus. But he's saying that when we destroy something, something new is created, aspects of the soul. If we release that consciousness that's trapped by the ego, of course, something becomes new and we become more individualistic. In these times where we see a lot of things where we don't know what's even going to happen in the next year, or even in the next few years, many people are unknown. It's causing a lot of fear in people, and everyone's looking for safety in something. That safety is making the world a hell. But Steiner talks about this, and he says this time can be used for both ways, because the Ahrimanic forces are really making their presence. And he actually says that Ahriman will incarnate as an individual in the world, as an antichrist. Whether that'll happen or not, I don't know. But it really does not matter, because the forces are present, and that's really what's going to change us. So I'll just read the quote. People were also very, very unconscious of what the incarnation of Christ in the event of Golgotha really signified. But they should await the incarnation of Ariman with full consciousness amidst shattering events that will occur on the physical plane. Amidst the perpetual stresses of war and other tribulations of the immediate future, the human mind will become very inventive in the physical domain. And through this very growth of inventiveness in physical life, which cannot be averted in any way or by any means, the bodily existence of a human individuality in which Ahriman can incarnate will become possible and inevitable. A task humanity during the next phase of civilization will be to live towards the incarnation of Ahriman with such alert consciousness that this incarnation can actually serve to promote highest spiritual development. Through Ahriman himself, humanity will become aware of what can or shall we say cannot be achieved through physical forces alone. But people must go forward with full consciousness towards this incarnation of Ahriman and become more and more alert in every domain in order to recognize with greater and greater clarity those trends in life which are leading towards his Ahrimanic incarnation. So basically he's saying here, if we go along mechanically with these forces of materialism, it's going to drastically take us down. But if we go in consciousness of we understand or comprehend what is happening in the world, this can give us a great understanding of the evils. And through that comes knowledge. Therefore, it can raise our state of being. And that's why you see so much decisiveness between people. It's these forces that are on pressure of the psyche in order to change, to force change. I remember having this and having some fear of the world, of the unknown, meditating on it, and I questioned myself, would I change if this didn't happen? I said, I don't know if I would. So for most people, this is a necessity. If all was lost, this knowledge would not be around. It would not be given. It wouldn't be out anymore. So there is a way out, and it's talked about in Zoroastrian in the spirit of wisdom. In this quote, he says, and Ahriman, the wicked, miscreated the demons and the fiends, and also remaining corrupted ones by his own unnatural intercourse. A treaty of 9,000 winters in unlimited time was also made by him with Ormazda, or Spenta Mainyu, the Christ. And until it has become fully completed, no one is able to alter it and to act as otherwise. And when the 9,000 years have become completed, Ahriman is quite impotent. That's an interesting concept, interesting quote here. Because basically, to sum it up, what he's saying is Ormazda, or Christ, had made a deal with Ahriman that he could only reign for 9,000 years. The key is there, that 9,000. What is that referring to? Well, if we're familiar with the tree of life, this becomes apparently obvious. On the tree of life, again, this is a map of our consciousness. The ninth sphere is Yesod. Yesod refers to the foundation. It is the etheric body. It is the vital body, or the energy body. With us, before I say any further, if you go up further, you see this relates to, as well, Tifereth. Tifereth means beauty. It has to do with willpower. When we look at the cross here of the Psi letter, it crosses at the heart. Our consciousness or self-observation of this all depends upon our willpower in order to raise those arms to the Logos, and as well to raise this eye up. Yesod represents a fire or an energy that we need within that is more superior to the mind, that can reduce the ashes of ego and of Ahriman. This energy has always been related with the sexual glands. And preserving that energy. That's why in Christianity and many different Buddhism and Hinduism, many different religions, there's such an emphasis on chastity. Because that energy, when not released, produces a great potentness to the psychology in order to reduce those aspects down. This comes, if you look at Stella Maris, is that it was always represented by that energy. Mary, Kundalini, different names, Maria. Stella Maris, if we break down what that means, it means goddess of the sea. But really, Stella means star, Maris means of the sea. The star is light. Or you could say fire. Fire that comes from the sea. Our sexual waters represent the waters. When that energy is used properly, it becomes fire. In the sense it evaporates. She is always represented with that. That energy is not mechanical, it's intelligent. She's the one that helps us guide through our disorganization to eliminate those elements within. It is a force of, you see the same thing with Poseidon. He is considered the goddess of the oceans. He's also shown as the earth shaker. His trident shows the spinal column with the three, also showing the waters and the relationship with the psychology. So in order to advance further, we should always look within, and our comprehension is limited. So it's always good for us to look for the divine in our answers. Looking to our Father, the being Atman, and as well the Divine Mother, which is just an aspect of the being. So many people talk about the Antichrist as something that is coming out into the world, as Steiner says, as an incarnation. We shouldn't be really so worried about that coming. Many people some people just are doomsday people, can't wait for that to happen. They worry about how the world is and how they're going to escape it, but they can't wait for it to happen at the same time. We shouldn't be worried about those events. If we don't prepare our mind now, we'll have no chance in that situation. Those powers, right now you can see what's happening in the division that's happening now. It'll just get much worse. Steiner has a quote that says, Samael has a quote that says, before Christ is revealed, the Antichrist is revealed. That's because we have to face our own Antichrist within before we can reach Christ. But as well, people talk about the Golden Age. The Golden Age is going to happen, but it's not going to happen before humanity knows the horrors of the world. We must go through that first. Any questions?
In the beginning you said, which tradition did you say?
Oh, Zoroastrian?
Zoroastrian. Oh, okay.
Yes, Persian. You see, everyone's familiar with the symbol, no one really knows. This is the symbol you see. It's coming from Zarathustra. He was the originator of that. He's not really an individual, it's really a title, like Christ is a title. And so there was actually many different Zarathustras. And you see this symbol at the top. That's You'll see that a lot. It's like him come. It's like an Egyptian symbol.
Oh,
It looks-
see, the
Bird, yeah, like Ra,
with
the goddess Ra. And you see him, I believe that's Zarathustra kind of coming out of the wings.
We have a question from the chat. How does the Aramaic forces relate to the inverted force of Samael?
But really, that force is like the star being upside down. Opposite side is Samael, really his doctrine was about sexual alchemy. So when that energy is used in a negative way, through lust, then obviously that would be the demonistic. And that's really the origin of Ahriman.
Another question from the chat. How do we find the correct internal state to an external event?
Through meditation. I didn't talk about this because that's so much because I really want to get focused more on psychology, or else this lecture would just keep going. In the lecture with Samael Aun Weor about we need to change our thinking, I believe, or change our psyche, he mentions a mantra called Gate Gate, Paragate, Parasamgate, Swaha. And this is the way to dive deep within our internal state, our own internal psychology. And that really only happens when we withdraw within ourselves through meditation. Because there's going to be aspects where are very animalistic within us that are very close to nature, that are going to be very hard to understand, things that are very close to our personality. And that's why Stella Maris, which I brought up at the end, is something we really need within. The mother always comes for the child, will always help us. And so if we are working on ourselves, she will assist. But it takes patience. It's not something that happens just immediately. If it was, we'd all be saints.
You mentioned Ahriman as, is it a force? Is it a person? Is it the devil? Is it an individual? Is it a collective?
So yeah, it's a combination of everything. It's really, when it comes down to it, it's a force. There is actual a demon of Ahriman that in the internal worlds that does exist. But the forces in this world, but you got to see it as a force in the world. It is evil in a sense is because we're not educated about it. If someone was not educated about fire, fire would be something that would be evil to them. Because they would burn themselves. It's the same thing with the Ahrimanic force. It becomes a collective force is because everyone is unconscious. Everyone is asleep. At least the majority of us are. Even myself to a great degree. So we have fears. And because of these fears, we look for safety. And what do we know best? We know materialism, because that's what we live in. So that's what we grasp. And that's what this demon relies on. Obviously, if something gets into enough energy where it comes to anything, like if you just know physical science, if you have a battery and it can't contain that, it reaches enough energy, it's going to explode. So the whole problem with batteries is really forming a material that can contain it. The same thing if the whole world, the internal state of everyone is asleep, and these forces of Ahriman, this ego, where you could really, as Samael Aun Weor describes, he is not an angelic in any way. It's completely evil within, is the originator of the ego. Will build up as a collective within. So whether something will incarnate is a whole nother story, but those forces will be very present and will put pressure on everyone. I believe I answered that, what the answer they're looking for.
Is it any different than Lucifer?
Yeah, I didn't want to get into Lucifer just because I felt that talk would get quite long. Steiner talks about the differences of Lucifer, and so does Samael Aun Weor. I actually like this definition the way Samael Aun Weor gives it compared to Steiner, but both give a similar definition. I think to complete what Steiner was talking about in his lectures to understand what the Luciferian force is, I would want a background of what Samael talked about. It makes a lot more sense. Lucifer is a demon as well, but there's a demon aspect of Lucifer, but as well, we have a Lucifer within. If you take that word, Lucifer, it means carrier of light. So that Lucifer within us is demonic because then our mind is not organized, our psychology is not correct. But through self-observation, through radical change within, we start to gradually transform that light. And Lucifer allows us, who is really our trainer, is known as the Joker, really can transform that light within. He starts to give us more light as we progress. So the difference is Lucifer can be changed to an angelic being, which he already really is, but within it's dark. Ahriman is the total opposite. He is the originator of the ego. He is not there to train your mind. He is to bring you down. That's the difference. Yeah, I didn't want to get into that topic just because I just felt that I had to give a whole lecture on Lucifer, and I didn't want to bring that up and confuse people. But yes, you'll see that there's a paragraph that Samael Aun Weor talks about with Lucifer to try to explain the difference, because I think he brought it up because Steiner had talked so much about Lucifer, Ahriman, and Christ. Good.
So you said earlier that we can overcome an ego, and Arimas or the Antichrist is still there. Like, so how do we completely eliminate?
Yeah, that's
you know.
that's the great work. Samael Aun Weor talks about there's two aspects of the ego over defects. One was the ego, which says majority of people can eliminate. But he says then there's the Antichrist. The Antichrist, as another person described, was kind of like a shadow or the residue that gets left over after the ego is eliminated. It's that aspect, that demon or the great beast that the Bible talks about in the Revelations, who can heal himself. And that's why so many masses have fallen, is because they become attached to the physical body in a sense, and they make a mistake. It's kind of hard for me to understand how an angel could do that, but that's the explanation. So for us, the best comparison we can have, I know there's an instance in my life where I thought I, not eliminated, but I thought it was gone. I didn't think I had to deal with it at a certain level. Then all of a sudden it just comes back. And you're just like, where did this come from? I've worked on this quite a bit. It's because it's that Antichrist within. And that's what most people fail. Like, all right, I got past this, continue on to something else, but it's not fully eliminated. For someone that eliminates the ego and the Antichrist is someone that actually resurrects the human body. And Samael Aun Weor makes that pretty apparent in his lectures. Yeah, you go ahead.
The 9,000 years that you said that there's some agreement between
between
and Christ.
Yes, or a
Is
Mazda.
that the same as the great year, like the Kali Yuga? I don't really remember the numbers with that.
I couldn't tell you for sure.
Suppose, we're traveling towards more of the central sun, and it takes like 4,000 or something years in the upswing, and then we get there, and then we're supposed to be coming back.
You talking about like a whole cosmic year?
Yeah, I guess that's
Okay.
it.
Yeah, I mean, it relates to
Is
this.
that the same timing? Is it the same thing?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it relates to this. Yeah, I mean, just with the Atlanteans, they went through the same thing. Ahriman, the culture of Ahriman was studied with the Atlanteans before they were sunk. It was actually, that's where it came from, that type of culture or tradition, which is total satanic. But I think it's the Turanians, I believe. I think I may have that word wrong. I'm not sure if the word's correct, but that was the race that was studying in Atlantis. And eventually they fell apart. It's a materialistic science completely. That's what it really is. It makes people believe that is the only reality. It's really a half-truth. A half-truth is more damaging than just a pure lie. Because then you pin people. People go, oh, this is true. How could this other part be a lie? And that's the hidden evil within. Yeah, but that's every cycle has that. It goes, it's in our point of evolution, there's going to be there's going to be billions of people that are going to go to hell because of this. Because they're just going to be carried by mechanical nature. It's not because they intend to go there. It's just that is the cycle of nature has given the human soul a chance to get somewhere, and it becomes so heavy that it can't hold no more. It's just like a drop on a leaf that's on the edge of the leaf. At one point, it has to drop. And so that is where humanity is at a point of that point. If it keeps going, I mean, you can imagine where this is going to go pretty easily. So that's why we have to be conscious of it, and we're given an opportunity to educate within. We just have to realize that human body will get old and die. It's the souls that matter. So we shouldn't be concerned. If we are concerned that what's going to happen, we're going to be put in a horrible situation, which could happen. But if we're sincere in our work, the Divine Mother, they want a perfect, a true psychological being. They're going to try to support you in what your needs are. That's not getting a Ferrari. It's going to be like, give them the ability to work. That's what they're going to care about. And if that's going to be painful, it's going to be painful. But the point we have to keep in mind that, look, we're going to suffer no matter what happens. Whether we decide to go along with everyone or not go along with everyone, we're going to suffer. There's a good quote I thought about bringing up. I just didn't know how to incorporate it in. In The Lord of God of Truth Within by Master M, he talks about an individual who had, in his previous incarnation, was in Egypt. And he resisted and stand tall against something he thought was very unjust, and actually lost his life because of it. But in this, he got respect from the sylphs of nature, which are the fire elementals. And because of that, they gave him greater knowledge for the next incarnation. And they had great respect for him. And that's the type of mentality we've got to have. Because this is going to happen. We're at the end. I mean, I think it's more than obvious.
So when you say like that a great deal of humanity is going to go to hell, that's like the klipoth that you talked about.
Yeah, that's klipoth, yeah. Yeah, just empty shells, meaning there's nothing left within. And they're being disintegrated so that just the ego and the bad elements get refined, just like bringing like a metal ore, creating gold. It's just nature's doing itself in order for it to start over again.
Are these forces necessary in the grand scheme of things, or is this a mistake?
It's a little bit of both. I would say it's a mistake because we allowed it to happen. But at the same time, it's necessary. Samael Aun Weor, as well as Steiner, said, if we were fully conscious, Ahriman, this force wouldn't mean anything. It couldn't take hold. There'd be people to be involved, but it couldn't take hold. So in that sense, because we're not aware that, in a sense, it is a mistake, but because of that mistake, it becomes something that is necessary for us in order to learn. As he said in the last quote, I thought it was good. Yeah, but people must go forward with full consciousness towards the Incarnation of Ariman and become more and more alert of every domain in order to recognize the greater and greater clarity of these trends in life which are leading towards Ahrimanic incarnation. I think that was the one before it. Anyways, he talks about as a process of evolution for us to understand the evils of this type of thinking.